welcome to our book launch. We're really excited to be here together to celebrate the publication of the book. Just a little housekeeping, could I remind you to have your microphones on mute, please? That will just help keep out any background noise. And just a really warm welcome to everyone from all around the world. Welcome to family and friends from New Zealand. Hope you're enjoying your breakfast in COVID-free New Zealand. Thank you for getting up early to join us. And we welcome those from Australia, from the Netherlands, from Kenya, from Scotland and Wales, from Croatia, from the States, from South Africa, from Spain. So we're quite an international audience. So it's really great to have you all here. A very warm welcome to you all.
You're welcome to crack into your drinks, Prosecco, whatever. We'll be opening ours about halfway through. And when we come to do that later on, we'll also be having some toasts. We've invited a couple of people to say a couple of things at that point. But if you would like to say something at that point, then do post in the chat to say, to indicate that you might like to say something, and we'll keep an eye on that. And there's a discount code for the book tonight, which you may have seen on the screen, but I'll post it in the chat in a minute, which is Mission 2020. And if you use that at SCM's website, you get 20% off, and that lasts till the end of October.
So we just thought we'd give a little bit of introduction to the book and who was John Taylor and why John Taylor. So as many of you probably know, John Taylor was an Englishman who was a mission partner in Africa, in Uganda. Then he was Africa Secretary for CMS, Church Mission Society, then General Secretary, and then Bishop of Winchester. And he died in Oxford in 2000. And Johnny and I came across his work since we've been in CMS, and we just found his work amazing, very prophetic, very prescient, enlivening, enriching, and quite radical. And then a few years ago, I was fortunate enough to meet his daughter, Joanna Wood. Welcome to you, Joanna. She's with us tonight, and she's going to say a few things later. So I was fortunate enough to meet Joanna, and she very kindly gave me his travel diaries from when he was Africa Secretary and General Secretary, when he used to travel in the 60s, 1960s and 70s, traveling all over to places where CMS mission partners were working, in places like Nigeria and India and Japan and China, the Middle East. Also went to the United States and Australia and New Zealand. In fact, he arrived in the States the day after President Kennedy was murdered. And he's such a great writer. He's poetic. He's very attentive and observant, like Johnny. He too was a photographer. So his writing is beautiful and very illuminating. And I really enjoyed reading the diaries. They were an absolute treasure trove of insights, of missiological reflections, and just great insights into culture and context, and some wonderful stories. I remember, for example, when he was in Japan, he wanted to go to a nightclub to see how young people hung out in Japan. When he was in Chicago, he saw the musical Hair. I wondered what some CMS supporters might think of that. So he was very attuned to culture. He enjoyed experiencing local culture, and it was really fun to read the diaries. And then at the same time as he was writing the diaries, he would refer to the CMS newsletters. So the CMS newsletters were written every month by a General Secretary. They were 1,000 to 1,500 words of missiology, accessible missiology, that was sent to members. And so he would refer to writing a CMS newsletter when he was writing the diaries. So I thought they would be good to look at too. So I spent my sabbatical last year reading through these 124 newsletters, as well as the diaries, and just found it an amazing, as I've said, treasure trove, a treasure chest of insights. And I remember when I was in New Zealand, actually, looking at some of these, because people, John Chamberlain, one of our CMS volunteers, very kindly photocopied them for me, because they live in the archives from which they cannot be removed. So I took the copies to New Zealand, and I was reading them in the CMS library, and I was WhatsApping Johnny photos of these newsletters because I was getting so excited about the material. I think I sent you 72 WhatsApps, didn't I?
I wasn't counting, but yeah, I'm sure you did.
So I was waking up in the middle of the night with all these exciting photos of the exciting stuff I was reading. So we decided together, when I got back to England, that we would work on the book together. I thought it'd be great to work with Johnny. He's so creative and interesting, has great ideas, and we really enjoyed writing the book. So we're just going to show you a little clip now of actually the diaries and the newsletters. A deep dive. Find Ken the librarian in his cave, which is the Max Warren collection, where there's a lot of exciting archives. Got my gloves on all ready to go and hold them. We're going to go and find the CMS newsletters and John Taylor's diaries, which set me off on this whole project. General Secretaries up to and including John Taylor wrote a monthly CMS newsletter, which was like 1,000 to 1,500 words of accessible missiology for members. Not very well known, so really enjoyed researching those on my sabbatical last year. And I was lucky enough to get his travel diaries from his daughter, Joanna Woods. So we're going to go and find them now. Ken, are you there? He's somewhere in the depths. Are you going to give them to me?
I am, yes. Right, so that's 3 volumes of the newsletter.
Thank you. We'll stand socially distanced. Here's the newsletters that I poured through during my sabbatical. Fantastic missiology. Really enjoyed reading them. So that was a great resource. And now we're going to find the diaries. Ken's just rolling back the shelves.
And here are the
Thank you. Oh, these are quite heavy. John Taylor's travel diaries. Look at that. An absolute treasure trove of missiology. All revealed in our book. We hope you enjoy it.
Do you want to show a couple of samples?
Yeah.
Now? Yeah, so these are a couple of, I mean, we won't read them out particularly, but this is the kind of thing that Kathy was sending me on WhatsApp, where she saw something that was interesting, sending it in my direction. So yeah, you get the kind of idea, the feel for that. So that little section there on little congregations is something we very much pick up on in the book.
And I just saw there Jesus is a great disturber, and encouraging us to use our imagination. So themes that we also reflect on in the book.
We've never met John Taylor ourselves, but we know that there are a few people here who have, at least one or two anyway, and some others who've kind of been influenced by John Taylor in some way. So we'd love it if you've got a connection to John Taylor. Feel free to post that in the chat while we're talking. That would be great. And I mean, if you've got a particular story, feel free to post that as well. I mean, yeah, I'd love to have met John. I'm really interested to hear what Joanna has to say this evening.
Yeah, thank you. So Joanna, we hope that you're there and that you've joined us, and we'd like to hand over to you now for you to just give a few thoughts on your father, maybe some stories and how you found the book. So over to you, Joanna. And you'll need to unmute yourself, I think.
Mute, am I muted? Can you hear me?
We can. Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
fine. Okay, I'm here. But first of all, Kathy and Johnny, thank you both very much indeed for writing the book. It's really exciting and just amazing, I think, to realise that these experiences and thoughts of more than 50 years ago are now still relevant. And you've actually brought them up to date for us today in the 21st century. And I'm quite sure my father would be really surprised and humbled to know that his writings are still of interest and useful for the church and her mission today. You surmise actually correctly he would have loved to have met Greta Thunberg, and would have had enormous respect for her. He enjoyed and was always invigorated by young people. But I think it's really clever of you to notice that same phrase, you spoiled children. But I'm sure he would also be pained and actually saddened to learn that we've still not learned the lesson of enough is enough. Yes, our house is still on fire. And your imaginings of what church could be really left me buzzing. And I feel that the timings of the publication of this book is a real gift, as we can now imagine church again following our many experiences of COVID. And as you confirm, my father was of the opinion that theology needs to be in touch with the world, so is a living theology. You write a lot about church as local, and you've picked up he longed to see the church overseas as relevant and local to its situation. On one of his many visits to Uganda, but this was in June '61, he writes home, "I was very nervous about my Luganda sermon in the cathedral this morning and got to work on it before breakfast to make part of it more relevant to things that are being talked about." And in July '62 from Freetown, he wrote, "I was pleased at the cathedral service yesterday morning to see that some of the traditional primness has gone, not a single tailcoat in the long row of sidesmen, whereas until recently, they all wore them and carried top hats." My father was a romantic and recognized that in himself. He would write home to our mother every 2 or 3 days with beautiful descriptions of the countryside, details of the rooms where he was staying, and characters of the people he met. He was also very dependent on receiving letters from home. From Nigeria in '60, he wrote, "I have 4 letters from you. I'm so grateful. I've read them several times, taking them out of my pocket at odd intervals. This non-stop movement has a strange effect, and one clings more than ever to home." Again, moving around from place to place, always screwing oneself up to meet new people. I begin to feel unreal and distracted. These trips could be really grueling. And one letter mentions the last 3 nights I've slept in the same bed. And this was a 2-month tour, which was constantly on the move. From India, he writes on one occasion, "It's our engagement day and I'm missing you dreadfully. Feeling a bit tired and depressed too after this first day of the assembly." But then he goes on to describe a bike ride he took. He was always keen to learn more about the countries he visited and the people. From Mexico, he writes, "I made the most of these 3 days since arriving before the heavy conference timetable imprisons me. I was lucky enough to make contact with the Boy Scout who gave me a hand with my baggage. He advised me about museums, and on Friday I went off on my own to the Archaeological Museum, which is beautifully arranged, and a very scholarly guide was taking a party round to which I attached myself. I've just begun to get a few of the facts about the old civilization clear," and then he goes on to elaborate. Also, in his many letters home, he is acutely aware of all my mother is experiencing and the demands made on her. He offers advice in one letter about the insurance for the piano and the violin, and he's always asking about us, his children. And at the same time, I discovered he's dealing with letters from CMS headquarters and writing up newsletters that are probably slightly overdue. I think his visit to Pakistan was probably one of the most difficult and painful. And it was here, Kathy, that many of your New Zealand CMS folk were working. In October '68, he writes, "I keep wishing you were here to share my more private thoughts and comments on everything that is shown and said. I feel quite burdened by the endless struggle that a minority church must endure in a Muslim state. Also, this hospital, church and school compound is rather sadly run down. Not enough spent for too long. Hospital managing, school a disgrace, pastor desperately underpaid. Yet the small church, beautifully built in Mughal style, contains the memorial tablets of many missionaries who gave their lives for the centre of witness. It is hard to bear the unspoken accusations which are felt many times on this trip. Why have CMS and Christians in Britain lost interest? Why have you reduced your efforts before the job is done? Then, like a comment aside, it's all very well to talk about handing over and the church taking responsibility. The hard fact is we've been trying for years to find doctors who will give us steady 10 to 12 years to staff these hospitals as assistants to Pakistani heads. And neither us nor other societies can find them in these days. He comments too, I find the clergy here are bright, sensitive men on the whole. They conduct worship decently, but have little sense of the sacramental fellowship, which could be so real. But they're desperately poor. And it distresses me to see how often they've been included in the parties that have been got together to meet me, mainly because their names are on the usual invitation list, and not with the sense that they are the vicar, the real leaders of the local team. They're very much second class in church circles, with missionaries, headmasters, doctors, and leading lay clergy, all in the first class. Yet, when they visit their desperately poor flock in the sweepers' quarters, they are real shepherds, gentle and loved, and knowing each individual. He adds such a high proportion of church members are the result of a mass movement among the sweepers. They're terribly poor and oppressed. And it's in this situation that you write in the book about the difficulties the symbol of the cross can convey, and the suggestion that the simple broom of these sweepers may unwittingly be a more perfect symbol. You detail 3 concepts of mission as prophetic, writing mission needs to discern the sign of the times and be alert to the winds of the spirit. Firstly, the eye that sees. Secondly, our ability to be signs of the kingdom of God. And lastly, the challenge that we should walk in solidarity with. But let me end with a story. I heard my father tell a number of times. I think it encapsulates the solidarity with the local, but in a surprising way. Certainly the Holy Spirit is at work. It concerns an aging tribesman who was attending the eye hospital at Peshawar. And on one of his many visits, he hands the nurse a dirty, crumpled piece of paper and asks her to tell him what it's all about. It was a letter from a young English lad who wrote thanking the tribesman for giving him back his health, giving him back his family, and giving him back his faith. On inquiring what this meant, the tribesman explained that he'd found this young lad derelict and lying on the pavement, almost dying. He was one of many who made their way with friends along the hippie trail, but this lad had fallen ill and his friends had gone on. The tribesman took him into his home, cleaned him up, fed him and provided more heroin. This aging Muslim pleaded with the youngster to kick the habit, urging him to pray to Jesus Christ. Eventually, the young lad recovered, made his way to the coast, earned sufficient funds to pay his way home. When the nurse asked this elderly tribesman why he advised the young man to pray to Jesus, his reply was, well, we all know that when we are up against it, the great evil, Jesus Christ is the only one who can save us. Thank you, Kathy and Johnny, for giving us this book and giving me at least more insights into these diaries. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joanna. Thank you for those lovely insights and stories about your father and some of his writings and stories from the diaries. It's great to have the family connection and just to hear more about some of his thoughts and observations. And as you said, he wrote beautifully and lyrically, was very observant and attentive. So for Johnny and me, it really was a delight and a pleasure to read his work.
And I mean, I think I was a bit nervous, never having met someone writing, trying to capture some of what they're saying and riffing on it. So hoping that we were faithful to that. So from my point of view, I'm glad you like it, Joanna. It's a relief.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we thought we'd just tell you a little bit about how we worked together and just read a very short part from the book, not too long, so don't worry. So when I came back from my sabbatical in Aotearoa, New Zealand, having read the newsletters and pondered again on the diaries and having got excited with Johnny via WhatsApp, we got together and we thought it would be really fun to work on it together. And Johnny came up with the idea of having church, mission and society as the titles for the sections. I still can't decide if that's brilliant or corny. So there's 2 chapters on church, which Johnny wrote, and 2 chapters on mission, which I wrote. And then the society, we picked 2 themes on which John Taylor wrote a lot. So one on the environment, Enough is Enough. He's one of the first theologians I've read who was addressing environmental issues back in the early 70s. And then a chapter on interfaith, which we called the yeast of nonconformity. Here's some great phrases and word pictures. So I'm just going to read you a couple of paragraphs from the introduction, which I think explains a little bit more about John's approach and a little bit more about mission and some of his writing. And then Johnny's going to take over and read a short section. So this is from the intro, where I wrote, "We've loved delving into this material and have found so much of it challenging, innovative, and pertinent for mission and theology in our day. By mission, we mean John Taylor's own framing of mission, where he wrote, mission means seeing what God is doing in a situation and trying to do it with him. Theology for Taylor is living, functional, and practical. His 10 years of teaching theology in the Lugandan language in Uganda in the mid-40s and early 50s forced him to think in very concrete terms. He wrote of teaching during that time. This exercise instilled in me the realization that every abstract idea, including our idea of God, is derived from experience, and all revelation is given through things that happen. True theology has to be incarnational. This had a profound influence on his understanding of theology and mission. Theology is living. It's not something dead, it's living, and it emerges out of our dynamic encounter with the world. In fact, Taylor later asserts there's no such thing as safe theology. We love that. There's no such thing as safe theology. He uses missiological and Christological lenses in his writings and reflections. Put simply, it's all about Jesus and it's all about mission. Taylor unpacks this in stimulating, challenging, and sometimes provocative and risky ways. Clearly, it was his involvement in mission and in CMS that enhanced and deepened his prophetic insights. And he encourages us to develop a posture of imagination, innovation, and improvisation in mission. So these are qualities that Johnny and I have tried to promote and develop in our pioneer training at CMS over the last 10 years. By the way, on Monday this week, we were 10. We celebrated 10 years of pioneer training. So that was exciting. We're looking forward to being teenagers now. So these are qualities we've tried to promote. And indeed, it's John Taylor who first encouraged us to see that the world through African eyes must involve this adventure of the imagination. That's another of his phrases that we love. Mission as an adventure of the imagination. So that's what mission is all about, and that's what we explore in this book.
Yeah, I think for me, my bumping into John Taylor originally was when I've worked for CMS now for about 19 years. And when I first joined and asked what CMS thought about mission, I was pointed towards some of John Taylor's work. And one of the books that I looked at was The Primal Vision. And I remember I was doing something in Australia and I was reading it on the plane on the way over to Australia and writing copious notes. And I constructed many of the talks that I did in Australia on that book on the way over. So that was kind of my introduction to John Taylor. And I just found it very resonant in terms of themes of mission today. So it was exciting when Kathy asked if I'd like to be involved in the book. But in terms of my approach to the sections that I've written in the book, which is why I was particularly interested and slightly worried what Joanna thought, was not to kind of do something that was sort of historic, descriptive, John Taylor said this, John Taylor said that. I much more tried to soak myself in John Taylor's writing and thinking and then let rip. Sort of improvise out of that. And one of the things that I've particularly found in reading John Taylor is that it frees me up. It makes me kind of bolder in terms of speech. And I like that about this book, that I sort of feel like there's a boldness to it in saying things which we can blame on John Taylor. But I'll just read a little bit from the chapter on church, which is the first chapter in the book, which is titled Leap Over the Wall or Perish, another of his great phrases. But this, I mean, my son Harry, who I think is in here today, laughed when he read this first chapter, because the first two metaphors I use are making sourdough and a forest, which are two of my loves. So anyway, that made him laugh. But the section that I'm going to look at just briefly is called Imagine Church as Fringe Dwellers. And he uses this phrase, fringe dwellers, a lot. Jesus was loved by outsiders, fringe dwellers. He spent time with them, seemed particularly drawn to them, and was definitely good news for them. He went to the other side of the lake to free a man who lived in the tombs and was tormented in his mind by unclean spirits. He touched unclean lepers, allowed himself to be touched by an unclean woman who'd been bleeding for years. He stopped to notice beggars and to restore their sight, but also to make them seen by those who refused to see them. He built his team out of uneducated working class men. He loved women and seemed able to lift their burden of shame. He gravitated to fringe places, the wilderness, a well in Samaria, the other side of the lake, tax collectors' homes, the north. I love that. He taught that a life that's full is one that's poor, grief-stricken, persecuted, peacemaking, hungry for and yielded to God's way. The church is Jesus' body and community of friends, so she is surely most herself when she is at the periphery with those who are fringe dwellers. So that's almost directly lifted, I think, from the kind of thing that John Taylor says. And then just jumping forward to a bit later in each chapter, one of the things we do in each of these areas, as well as trying to be imaginative about what the implications or possibilities might be for church, say, is we also think about ways that the church might have got stuck. So at the end of the first chapter on church, there's a section called Becoming Unstuck. And I thought I'd just read you a little bit from that. Church is socially constructed. It's something people make up and have made in response to particular times and places as their way of working out what it means to be the body of Christ. They make it with cultural things, music, words, architecture, ritual, leadership, governance, money, and so on. This construction is informed by reflection on the tradition, on scriptures, on the times, the context, and there are many constructions possible, and world Christianity shows us that many exist within the global ecosystem of the church. That's the gift of other cultures. They show us that what we thought was the way of doing things is simply a local theology, and they bring a redemptive gift that we've not seen before. Parishes, church buildings, bishops, regulations. These are things people have made up. Anglican episcopacy is the product of culture and history rather than theology. The church did fine without a parish system for 1,000 years or more. That's not to say that these things that have been constructed should be taken lightly or they're not good things, but that does mean they can be unmade too. And as I say, yeah, some of those are direct quotes from John Taylor, who was pretty bold about what he said about church. So yeah, we kind of do that, how do we get unstuck as well as the imaginative piece as well. Okay, that's a bit about the book. What we're going to do now is crack open our Prosecco and celebrate. I don't know how this works online, but if you've got a drink, you might like to do the same. And to give you a chance to have a drink, what we'll do, we pulled out some of our favourite quotes from John Taylor. He's very good at a sort of pithy soundbite. Some of them we've mentioned already, and I've put them together with some of my photographs. So while we crack open the Prosecco, and before we invite people to share some toasts, we'll share screen and play a track of music that will just scroll through about 20 or so of those images. Woo!
Whack.
Fill it out. Some things are stranger on Zoom than others. I think this is up there.
So, cheers, everybody. We hope you enjoy the book.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll share these images while you get yourself a drink and have a short break.
I think that's a great resource, those photos that Johnny's paired with John Taylor's sayings. He's got some really pithy sayings. You can see he's a wordsmith, and they're just great photos. So Johnny has them actually as little cards. So message Johnny if you would like that as a resource. They're on like business card size, photos on business cards if you would like them.
Yeah, I am actually adding them as photos on my Flickr pages as well. So if you message me via Facebook or whatever, there will be an album of them online as well. But I'm kind of doing them one at a time because we're drip feeding them one a week.
Yeah, if you're of the Facebook age, which I know ages us all, each week we're posting a photo and a reflection on one of those sayings. So this week you posted on Leap Over the Wall or Perish, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah. One of my favourite ones is cherish the weakness of limited means. If only we could learn that. Anyway, we'd like to offer a few toasts to John now, and I did ask a couple of people to be willing to do that. So I'd like to call on Jill, Paul, and then David Shevington from SCM. Might you be willing to say a few words? And then finally Steve Bevins from Chicago. So Jill, can we ask you from the Isle of Man?
Hello. Yes, I wondered if you were going to recognise the Isle of Man, which is
sorry,
a foreign
Jill.
country.
Where is the Isle of Man? Is it in Britain? Is it in Europe? Is it
It's in Britain. It's not in the United Kingdom. It's one of the British Isles.
Because I noticed I got charged on my phone bill for calling you, Jill.
Yes, you would. Sorry about that, Kathy. We're international here. Yeah, but I wanted really so much to say how much I've valued the work of John Taylor. I did meet him a couple of times. He was a man who was always pleasant to meet. There was a gentle and kind warmth about him, and a great empathy with what was going on around him. As Joanna said earlier, that looking out for the Boy Scout who'd helped him, you know, that was the sort of thing you sensed when you were with the man. He was retired by the time I was working with the Church Mission Society, but I found the CMS psyche and perspective was totally infused with the inspiring legacy of people like him, Henry Venn, Max Warren, and then more recently, John Taylor. And it was the mission-rich wisdom of his theological writings of the 70s and 80s that was revelationary to me. And it was both refreshing and affirming. I mean, I read The Go-Between God, and I just felt totally moved by it. And I was thinking, this was written 30 years before I read it. Why is this not being put into place now? And I think it was 1972 that was written. And I gathered lots of gems from it to use to help my work with churches to reflect on what they were doing in mission. I was amazed then that what had been written 30 years before hadn't been activated. I also noticed that there was a paper written by a companion of CMS, Baptist pastor, the Reverend Joe Capolio. Do you remember him? Mm-hmm. And he did a paper calling, guess what? Releasing the Colonized Imagination, which was his reflections on mission organizations and the African context. So his influence has been spread wide for a long time. But reading Johnny and Kathy's book at the end of August set everything on fire for me again. In the Diocese of Soda and Man, yes, we've just embarked on a radical review of our churches and which ones we're going to keep open. And imagining mission with John V. Taylor is directly relevant. So Kathy and Johnny kindly helped me to put together extracts from the chapter on change, dissent, and refounding for our churches to see. And when I was speaking to the dean at the cathedral, he said, oh yes, John Taylor, his father was Bishop of Soda and Man. Oh, so you remember that, do you, Joanna? But he would have been John would have been in his 30s when his father was bishop here, so he probably didn't spend much time on the island. And someone else said, oh yes, John Taylor, wonderful, inspiring man, love his books. So what do I know of him? Well, from the 90s, he was based in Oxford, and that's where he and Peggy lived, and you would have been there as well, Joanna, and the family. after retirement in 1985. And they lived a skip and a jump from All Saints Convent in East Oxford. Now, one of the sisters there, I think it was Sister Margaret Ann, she used to do all his typing for him. So I met him there occasionally. And on occasions when I went to CMS meetings in London by train, I occasionally met John Taylor waiting for the same train. And he would greet me like a cheerful neighbor. So he was always a joy to meet. And I don't think, well, no, I know, I didn't realize at the time what an inspired theological giant he was. He was a gentle witness and a true prophet. So here's to John V. Taylor, a man of God who could lift your spirit both by his company and by his profoundly insightful writing. And his radiant witness and prophetic words remain as vibrant as ever, don't they? So please raise your glass, no doubt with all the saints, and with thanks through Christ, to John V. Taylor.
John Taylor. Thank you, John. Yeah. Thank you. David from SCM, John's publisher, and who kindly published this book. David Shevington, are you willing to say a few words?
Yeah, that's fine. I was a while ago, that was a couple of years ago, I was mulling on books around theologies of consumer culture and the environment, because I'd had this brave, big new idea that there must be theologies to be had around this area. And people around me, people I know in the retail trade and so on, were saying, theology is not really there yet. People aren't really picking it up, that sort of thing. And then it turned out that this chap called John Taylor had done something called Enough is Enough. I think it may have been Johnny, who I can't remember. I remember a conversation at Greenbelt last year. Maybe you pointed it out to me, or maybe I discovered it around the same time. I can't remember. And it turns out that as a publisher, we had a long-standing relationship with somebody who's written that book, many years before. I knew about Go Between God, of course, because that happens to be a book that is extraordinary and continues to sell, and a book that continues to sell after however many years that is, 60 years, something like that, 50 years, that's testament, particularly in mission, I think, because that suggests there's something really resonant, really relevant, prophetic really about that book that has meant that we people are still picking up copies. So I don't know how many, I'd love to know how many reprints and things we've done of that book, but there'll be many. But what's fascinating about your book, Johnny and Kathy, is that I think when I'm approached with a book about and we do get a lot of folks come to us with books about particular figures in theology who are their real joy and passion, and that's great. But often, I think, well, but that's fine as a piece of biography or something that might have been relevant some time ago. But what does it do for me now? And what I think the gift your book has done is for doubters like me who hear of somebody whose work was significant some time ago and are now suspicious, thinking, well, don't I want the latest thinking? Your book, for somebody like me, says, here's why this is absolutely relevant and vital and important now. And I think that's a gift to be able to write a book that does that. So it's been a pleasure and an education. The best books are always the books that I learn more than anything. So it sounds like lots of other people are being inspired and excited by this book, but even if that's not the case, I've been inspired and excited by this book just by being the person involved in publishing it. So there you are. So that's great. So a big thank you to you. So I guess I would say let's raise a glass not only to John Taylor but also to Kathy and Johnny for having the foresight and the passion and the enthusiasm to take this project and go forward with it and bring us this book. So
Thank
to
you.
Johnny and
Thanks
Kathy.
to John Taylor. Thank you.
Yeah, and David, you didn't say, but The Go Between God is going to be republished in a new edition in January or February, isn't it?
Yes, I think it is either January or February, but I can't remember which one. But yes, yeah, we're going to do it with a lovely new cover, and just because, you know, the importance of bringing it to a new generation, I think is huge.
Right.
So yeah, excited to do that.
Great, thank you. And Steve Bevins from Chicago, could we call on you now to say a few words, please?
Certainly, Kathy. It's really great being here, and thanks for the invitation and the invitation to share something. Reading this book was just such a joy for me. I enjoyed it so much, and I was reading it as I'm writing a book on missionary ecclesiology. I don't know if I'll ever finish it, but I'm writing it, and I read the book, and I got out my manuscript, and I said, oh, I got to quote it here, I got to quote it here, and I got to quote it here. I was just so excited. It really was a fantastic book. And so I'd like to raise a glass to John V. Taylor, to Kathy, Johnny, and to creativity and imagination and the openness of the spirit to join in her creative and imaginative work of the reign of God. Cheers.
This is what's good to do tonight.
Thank you, Steve. And we'd also like to thank Steve for reading the manuscript and giving us an absolutely fantastic endorsement on the back cover. So thank you very much, Steve, for that. The cheers. Okay.
Yeah. So lastly, the last thing we'll jump into is that in the book, and actually this came out of a conversation with David when we sent him the first draft of the book. He pushed back a bit and said, well, can you give some examples of how this plays out? And we to and froed on that a bit. And what we ended up doing was thinking, actually, the thing that might be most helpful would be to do some stuff around imagination and creativity. And Philip Mount Stephen, who was leader of CMS for a bit, he said something that struck me quite forcefully, which is that the major problem of the church in the West is a deficit of imagination. So one of the things we've done in each chapter of the book, at the end, there's a section called Exercising Creativity, which actually talks about the processes of coming up with ideas and has a different approach to that. And it's quite playful. There are some things that you can try out and play with. And I hope that they will be conversation starters and discussions and so on for people. But we thought we'd try that out this evening. Kathy's dreading this bit, I think.
Yeah, this is where I need more Prosecco.
So one of the ideas in one of the chapters we call provocations. So one of the ways that people come up with ideas is when they're provoked. So a really good example would be if there was a global pandemic, for example. That's a kind of provocation. And that, all sorts of churches have discovered things, gone online and done things that they wouldn't have done if they weren't provoked in that way. So sometimes, you're provoked because something just happens to you. But actually, one of the insights around people that write on creativity and stuff is to say that, okay, if when you're interrupted or provoked, you come up with ideas, what about if you program interruptions into your routine, or you create interventions or provocations to help you to think differently? And in one of the chapters, I can't remember which one, I list 5 possible provocations. So we thought we would try this out this evening. And I've got here a set of cards called Oblique Strategies that were created by Brian Eno, who's known for his creative thinking. And he wrote these for musicians and artists, and the idea being that when you get stuck in the creative process, you pull out a card, and you have to use the first card you pull out. You can't look for one that you like, Kathy.
I tried to rig it before, but he wouldn't let me.
You kind of use that as a provocation, as a response to what you're thinking about. So we're going to try this out live and direct with you guys and see what happens. So,
And ask him to put some in the chat.
yeah. And yeah, we'd love you to get involved by posting the ways that your imagination is sparked in the chat. So the pressure's on you guys as well.
Yeah,
So
not just me.
here's the scenario, the first one. Those of you that follow Kathy on Facebook might have seen that this week she posted a cross stitch that she'd done, we should have brought it, that says "Smash the Patriarchy," which I have to say I absolutely loved. I didn't know I was a fan of cross stitch, but I thought cross stitch that says "Smash the Patriarchy," yeah, I'm on board with that. So Kathy, this is for you. What might we actually do about that in our own organisation? Choose a card. Oh no, that's describing what the cards are.
Couldn't even read it. Gardening, not architecture.
I don't know if you can, the lights are too bright. Gardening, not architecture.
Gardening, comma, not architecture. So I've got to think about how to make that relevant to smashing the patriarchy
in your organisation.
and CMS.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if we got all the men growing things and seeing what hard work it is to make something grow.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Well, maybe that would be a start in smashing the patriarchy, some sort of appreciation for growth, attentiveness, slowness, because sometimes it takes a long time for things to grow, cultivation, nurturing, maybe getting in touch with their more, dare I say it, feminine side.
Yeah.
Might that help?
Yeah.
Thinking about gardening rather than architecture, which can be boxy, hierarchical, straight lines. Maybe we need more curved lines in nature.
Yeah, okay, a couple of suggestions in the chat from, they're going down so fast. Yeah, from Doug Gay, weeding. And,
yeah, weed out all the men.
and manure. Put everyone on gardening leave to reassess their focus.
Well, that's not a bad
That's
idea.
from James Fox Robinson. Thank you, James. From Julia Golding, move the hierarchy out of church buildings and give them a small holding to cultivate together.
Great idea, Julia.
From Ruth Wells to everyone, take a spade to the patriarchy.
Yes. Smash it.
From Tom Brackett, representatives of the patriarchy are only allowed to speak while standing in gardens and only after a female has offered commentary on what they're about to say. Brilliant. From Amanda, lettuces. From Jill Paul, stop building solid frameworks, plant seeds, enable all your teams to be watered, given the right shade or light, pruned when needed. Very good.
Well, maybe we could have patriarchal scarecrows.
Yeah, yeah.
Scare people
From
off.
Idina, dig up the car park and make a community garden, men and women together. Okay, very
Some
good.
great ideas.
Have you got
Right.
a challenge for me?
Yep. So my challenge for you is the rule of 6. The rule of 6, what does that do to or say about or do for church? The rule of 6 in church.
Okay, so the oblique strategy I've got says distorting time. Tom Brackett says the role of sex in church. I think
It's my accent.
that's your new Zealand
It's
accent.
6, Tom. 6. Do you want to say it? But maybe that's a better one. You've thrown him now.
So you throw me now, that's a different provocation. So, Tom, the rule of six, we should probably explain in Britain, is that under the restrictions, you can only meet with 6 people rather than lots of people in one place. I mean, churches have been allowed to gather with up to 30 people, but it may well get changed again. So I would say distorting time. The first thought that goes to me, maybe this is an obvious one, is that it often feels like church time is Sunday time when everyone gathers. But I think the best times I have in terms of church are often in smaller groups, round the meal table, having conversations. And I really like the idea that you distort the regular time of church and move it into homes on weeknights, round the meal table and so on. And so that's my first thought. It's a bit lame, I admit, but that's
Not
a
bad.
starter.
Small time church from Doug.
Yeah. The rule of 6. I mean, this is good. Yeah, Sally, I kind of know what you mean here. The rule of 6 distorts the idea of massive growth, halves the disciples. So, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. The disciples with 12 did quite a lot. So you can do quite a lot with 6. There's 6 chairs around our table. Church happens at meal times. James Fox Robinson. Kate Ellis, the rule of 6 would be to reinstate a rest day. Oh, very good. Yeah, distorting time. Yeah. 3 or more is a church. 6, well, that allows wonders to happen. Yeah, good. Okay, you get the idea anyway. So that's a bit of fun. That's Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies. It is actually, if you're interested in it, you can get it as an app on your phone, and when you shake the app, an oblique strategy comes up. So that's a bit of fun.
Yeah, so the book, each chapter has some ideas like this at the end of it. So you can play around with lots of ideas and just, I mean, I think that showed what kind of creativity is out there when you have some brainstorming, looking at things from a different frame.
Yeah.
So that's our time up. Thank you very much for attending. We're really grateful that you could be with us this evening. Slightly weird over Zoom, but on the other hand, we've been able to have people from all over the world, including the Isle of Man. Thank you, Jill. Not sure how that fits in with smashing the patriarchy, but great to have you here. So just a reminder that the book code Mission 2020 will get you, is it 20% discount from SCM until the end of October. So you've got until the end of this month to get the book from SCM with that discount. And we would love to know what you think of it, any feedback, any ideas. Please do Facebook us, message us, email, whatever. We'd love to know what you think. So thanks very much for taking the time to join us. And we hope you enjoy the book and have a good day or evening wherever you are in the world. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, great to see you.
Bye-bye.
I'll play the slideshow again to fade.